So my sincere thanks to AHDB, but also to Emily, because Emily, I think, has set a really good baseline about what is natural capital. And also, she has to listen to me again. I want to give you a practitioner's view, because at the end of the day, regardless of all the different things I do off farm, I have the privilege of owning a lovely farm immediately outside the city of Derry in Northern Ireland. I'm a fifth generation farmer. My son is there running it now, and my grandchildren are there. So I've got the sixth and seventh generation already there. Something that's very precious for us is our social sustainability and our social resilience in this journey. But what I want to do is share our journey and share some of the experiences that we have accumulated. I'm not going to talk at you at all. And I'm really looking forward to our conversations then with Emily and I to sort of tease this out. A little bit of background as such. We grow willow trees, short rotation willow trees, and dry stock on our farm. I'm an advisor to AHDB and in Scotland, Quality Meat Scotland. I've been in a policy advocacy role for a long time. After I was president of the Ulster Farmers Union, which I stepped down in 2004, from 2005 to 2012, I chaired DEFRA's Rural Climate Change Forum, a multi-stakeholder forum answering directly to Margaret Beckett and then Hilary Benn many years ago about how could the land-based sector go on a journey around climate change. I've been involved in carbon segregation. I chaired the Writing the Sustainable Land Management Strategy in Northern Ireland. And for the last 5 years, I've chaired a group of 7 farms, including my own, on a journey to net zero. And so I'm going to share you those experiences. If I take all my advocacy hats off me and I just wear my own farmer's hat, and month of January is always a difficult month because I have to sit in front of the family accountant, have to get the end of year tax returns done, have to square my own balance sheet as such. So if I put that hat on and I look at the journey around natural capital, all of us as land managers and farmers are facing the same issue. We are being pressurized in many ways. Financially, it is really tough to get your future, your total income from the marketplace. We are seeing the disappearance of public intervention in the way that we used to know it as such. And so, first and foremost, my financial sustainability and sitting down every January with my son and with my family accountant is a pertinent moment and a sobering moment as such. So I, like many in this room, are looking at every avenue that could bring new revenue streams onto my farm. So when I do that, what specifically, when I'm engaging in these conversations with people who believe that I can do public goods for them and they believe there's a value in it, is the first question I ask them is, what are you asking me to do? By when? And for how long? What are the actual things you're asking? Second of all, will it distract or interfere with the things already in my business? And, if I have to deliver it, my own business and my food production and my energy production is changing too. Will it be sympathetic to it? The third thing is, it's a contract. So it's a contract. How are you going to measure, report, and verify my activity? And are they going to be subjective or are they going to be objective? I can work to objectivity. I struggle with subjectivity when someone comes in 5 years' time and on a whim makes a judgment of my behavior of the 5 previous years. As we go on this journey, the science and knowledge around this will improve. Will the contract allow for that improvement as we go on that journey? At the end of the day, these are new markets. Where can I go to get independent advice? And hats off to AHDB for holding these roadshows, because that really is, starting that journey and helping levy payers actually start to get their head around that. But in total, as a contract, there are times that I might have to get out of that contract. What is the cost of dissolving that contract? Whether it's death in the family, whether it's whatever. someone has to put a road through your property, you know, those things happen. How do I do that? Is there provision for force majeure? I know 20 years ago, a lot of my neighbours planted a lot of ash trees. Today, they're not very happy. Ash dieback has really caused a problem. And it wasn't their fault, okay? So do we have force majeure clauses in these contracts? Because things will happen as we go through that. And, you know, at the end of the day, are the transactions costs? What are they? Are they transparent? I actually personally have a problem. The people who are going to judge me are also going to be the people that pay me. And actually, I would much prefer to see those separated. And the people who are going to pay me are not the people who are going to judge me and measure me. So those are the key things initially when I started looking at this. And I'll come back later on. So the one thing about coming after Emily is Emily already has got most of your presentation done. But the fact that I'm actually going to repeat some of what Emily is saying is because we really want you to understand what is coming down the road at us. And I do it in a different way. And the one that I'm closest to, it's not my only subject, is I'm particularly interested in the journey to net zero. And if I look at what is already there, we have both international and national legislation driven by the United Nations, from the Paris Accord through, and as we all heard from last night in Washington, the United States have now pulled out of the Paris Accord. Within the UK, with the Climate Change Act as such, and that is the legislation to which is driving this agenda. But you also then have a very large private sector initiative too, and that's going at a global level. So you have the World Business School, the World Business of Sustainable Development, and they set up the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. They set up the science-based targets as such. And this is where Emily's very kindly taken us through the description of these Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. This is where they sit. And these are being driven by the private sector. And one of my frustrations about this is when I look at this, the two don't talk to each other at the moment. And it's one of the, DEFRA and IGD, the Institute of Grocery Distribution, have set up a thing called the Food Data Transparency Partnership. You can access it on the DEFRA website. I represent AHDB on that. And one of my frustrations here is, can we actually make sure that whatever journey we go on for the private sector, the public sector gets a record of it, and it's reported across, whether it's biodiversity, whether it's climate, whatever. And so that's one of the challenges we're looking at. On top of that, you will have seen that in the last 18 months, the Competition and Monopolies Authority have stepped in and are now going to examine claims, labels on products to see, are they actually what they say they are? And so they're coming in to judge that. We have industry initiatives, although now it'll be interesting to see under the current present NFU whether this takes a different form in the NFU as such. And you've also got what Emily's already flagged up, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. This is particularly interesting coming through the banks. Some of your banks will, if they haven't already asked, be asking you for what is your journey. So you've got really an awful lot coming through. So if I go back and take my advocacy hat off and I go back to my farm, and I go back to the work I'm also doing with my 6 other farming colleagues, where do we start on this? Well, we decided if you're going to go on a journey, make yourself informed. Try and find out your own numbers. So for us, the 7 of us came together. We got a bit of funding through the Belfast government, and we came together. And the key thing we used that funding was to baseline and benchmark all of our businesses and compare them. And so that we could actually, and we looked at greenhouse gas emissions, estimated carbon removal sequestration, the carbon in our soil, the carbon in our trees, and for the first time gave us a net carbon position. And from that, it has empowered us to make better quality decisions. And that has become the key emphasis for us to change our behavior. And key in that is doing it in a way that is not siloed or single-issued. Emily raises a very pertinent conversation. This is not just our carbon silo single vision. We have to look across the wider breadth of natural capital. And I'll come back and talk about how we are doing that. But key on this journey is knowing your own numbers allows a more balanced negotiation. So regardless of whoever comes down your farm lane, whether it's government, whether it's carbon, whether it's water, whether it's biodiversity, you at least can have an intelligent conversation with them. You can assess the colour of their money, and you can make a more informed decision. Is this right for me? Does it suit my business? Does it suit the objective? The image you're seeing, by the way, I don't know if anyone's seen this, we predominantly come from a livestock industry, that is what they call a green feed unit, and that is us physically measuring methane emissions from cattle on my own farm as we go through a rather unique project where we're grazing willow leaves as part of our methane mitigation on our farm. And so it really shows you how far you can take the measurement if you chose to. So I joined up with 7 other colleagues. You can see them there. We're completely spread around Northern Ireland. We've different enterprises purposely. We've different climates and we've different soil types purposely. We wanted to see the diversity and the richness coming from these farms. And we did start on a carbon agenda first, and I make no apologies for it, because that's the one that's hitting us the quickest. So when we did this, we went through one of these life cycle assessment calculators, and you can see the 7 of our farms, the enterprises. You can see our gross emissions, and for the first time, you can see our segregation. There is a health warning on our segregation. Is when you do the current calculators, our knowledge in carbon segregation and carbon removals is very poor. And so the assumptions here are what they call tier 1. So it's an international average, and I'll talk a bit more about it. But the interesting thing when you do this is for the first time we see the true net position for land-based businesses, land-based food-producing businesses. And what you can see in all of those businesses, even the intensive dairy farms, what you can see is their net position is somewhat less than their gross position. Yet it is their gross position at the moment that is reported and is wanted in the Scope 3 declarations, and therefore doesn't tell the true story of what all land-based businesses actually do. But what you'll also see is no 2 farms are the same. There is no silver bullet out there. And so I go back to Ian's initial comment, it's actually up to you to find out where you are on this and make the right decisions for your businesses. Some farms will find this journey a lot easier than others. And interestingly, some farms are already beyond net zero today, but they don't know it because they've never done these calculations. And neither does the public know this. And back in October time, I had the privilege, the BBC Countryfile magazine published an 8-page article on my own farm. But it took 6 weeks to write that article because the BBC weren't ready to understand that my farm with livestock was beyond net zero today. Something that is not talked about. So, when you go on this journey, and whether it's carbon or whether it's wider natural capital, we actually do need to bring some integrity to measurements. And this is really a real problem at the moment, is we haven't invested very heavily. And I know when I chaired DEFRA's Rural Climate Change Forum, I secured £13 million to help smarten up the emissions in the greenhouse gas national inventory. But I failed in earning and getting money to do the same for carbon removals or carbon sequestration. And at the moment, our carbon sequestration is done to tier 1. It's an international average. Tier 2 is a national average, and tier 3 is your actual farm data. And the journey we really want to go on, and AHDB wants to go on, is how do we move the accuracy upwards to actually use actual farm data? Because alas, the sad thing out there is when you go through these calculators, and if you are in an early adopter or in that top quartile, when you go into a calculator, the average that is given against you is the average. So it dumbs your development down and actually masks the people who don't want to do anything. And that's not fair. And so really the journey has to go on accuracy. And when we particularly look at carbon, there are many carbon models out there. And this paper I'm quoting here from Wageningen University Research in June 23, they looked at 40 different carbon models for measuring carbon sequestration. And they really struggled to get one that really worked across all the different landscapes. So when we came together as farmers, we said, well, what added value can we do? So we decided the bit that we were going to add that would bring extra value to this is how do you measure carbon in the landscape? And then by doing that, do these tools also measure other natural capital and widen it out? So the two technologies we've backed, one is actually an aerial survey using a technology called LiDAR. I don't know how many in this room have heard of LiDAR before? Okay, quite a few. For the people who haven't, LiDAR is like radar. Every ship and plane uses radar. Sends a radio beam out, it bounces off something, it comes back, you capture it, and you plot it, and you try and avoid it if you're a ship or a plane. LiDAR does the same, but it uses lasers, which is far more accurate. So this technology is we fly over the landscape, and the whole of England has been done by DEFRA at about 1 scan per square metre. Satellite will do it at 1 scan per 10 square metres. We're doing it between 16 and 40 scans per square metre. So the accuracy is just astonishing, and I'll show you some of the images in a moment of what you get. And if you repeat this every 5 years, you measure change. So if I put in a new riparian strip, if I plant a hedge, I come back 5 years' time then, I will have it, and I will have it in detail. I don't have to go out and physically walk it or measure it. The second technology that we've settled upon is actually a team in Dundee who can actually do soil cores down to 1 metre deep or to the bedrock. Because certainly when we started this journey, I was told, particularly where I come from, which is grassland agriculture, is soils under long-term grass plateau in carbon and you can put no more into it. That is the general perception. But that is because they've only measured to 30 centimetres. And it's also because they haven't changed maybe their management practices as such. So what AgriCarbon do is they measure down to 1 metre or to the bedrock. And they do 0 to 15 centimetres, 15 to 30, 30 to 60 and 60 down. So I now know how much carbon I've got and where is it. And if I repeat this every 5 years, I see have I got more, have I got less, and where is it appearing? Because the deeper I put it, the more permanent it becomes, although my carbon will never be fully permanent because it's biology as such. And the benefit of this is I deliver beyond IPCC compliance, but also I can do other things, particularly with the LiDAR. So where I come from in Northern Ireland, we have a huge water quality problem. And you do in parts of England as well. And the great thing about the LiDAR is we can do an extraordinary 3D of the landscape and create what we call runoff risk maps. So if you want to reduce agriculture's negative impact on water courses, knowing where water leaves your land, carrying nutrient, pesticide and soil and discharge it is really important. And I'll show you in a moment what we do in this. So this is this image that you're seeing here is my personal farm. The difference in colours are the heights of the trees and hedges. My farm is rather unique. I have 5 different land uses. I have 250-year-old oak woodland. I have 35-year-old oak woodland. I've got 120-year-old silver pasture. I've got 200-year-old grazing ground. And then I've got 30-year-old short rotation willow after arable, after 30 years of continuous arable. So a real cross section. But the beauty of this is you can really digitalize your landscape. And then if you repeat it every 5 years, you overlay one and the other and you can see the difference. From this, we can create a carbon asset register, which is really accurate. It's objective. And so this is the carbon balance, the above ground carbon asset register for my own farm. You can see the hedges, the heights, the lengths, single trees, deciduous woodland, coniferous woodland. You can see AGBs, the above ground biomass and the total carbon. And the only thing we use a model or an algorithm to is work out the roots. And we use an IPCC algorithm to convert that. So on my farm, we have just under 1,350 tonnes of carbon. And when we do this in both our trees and hedges and soils across the 7 farms, what blew our mind is when we started this, we had no understanding of the scale of capital that we had out there. So on 7 farms in Northern Ireland, what did we find? Is we had 500,000 tonne of carbon already there. When we had no idea. Also too, what was interesting, 97% of that carbon was not in trees, it was in the soil. Again, really interesting. Even on my farm, and you've just seen an image of it, 80% of the carbon on my farm was in the soil. And so wherever we go on this, it is really important that soils are put first. This goes back to Ian's comment right at the start. It starts in the soils. One of my challenges on this is we hope when we do this in 5 years' time again, we might have 530,000 tonnes. And my challenge that I have put down to both government and to Scope 3 developers is, will your system be smart enough to pick up the consequence of my behavioural change? Because at the moment, it isn't. And that is one of the things that AHDB are working with them. But to give you a feel of how you can use this digitalisation of the landscape, this image you're seeing here is a runoff risk map using the same LiDAR survey, but using a different piece of software. And the yellow and the red, now this is on my friend Hugh Harbison's dairy farm. He has 24 fields. This happens to be the worst field, and I'm using it for an example. That the yellow and the red are where the surplus rainwater leaves his farm. The red is where we know through soil analysis he's got high levels of phosphate, and when the ground is waterlogged, that phosphate rises and also goes in. The blue in that is where his water courses are. What is interesting when you look at this closely is he was going to put a buffer the whole way along his water courses. But if you look at that, 60% of the buffer he would put in would be in the wrong place. So this tells you exactly where to put it in. But what's really interesting, when Hugh got this map, he got it a month after he had gone through his calculator. And in his calculator, his big emission footprint was nitrogen fertilizer. In Ireland, we grow a lot of grass. It's a monoculture of perennial ryegrass. And as much synthetic nitrogen fertilizers we can get away with, we do. And we produce a lot of white water and red meat from it. One of the things we've been trying to do in this is we've not been focusing on methane as much, but on nitrous oxide, is that actually, Hugh phoned me one night, he said, "John, I've made a decision." I said, "What decision?" He said, "You know those weeds that you keep talking about?" And the weeds I keep talking about were herbs and legumes embedded within grasses to create a herbal ley or a multi-species sward. He said, "You told me they open up the ground." I said, "They do." I said, "The work done by Christina Marley in Aberystwyth show that adding chicory and red clover to the soil will increase water infiltration rates by about 16 times. So if you want to reduce runoff, getting the water into your soil is a better place for it." But I had already done from the research farm I had run in the Republic of Ireland, we know by switching to multi-species swords, in 1 year we've had a 300% increase in earthworm population. And just a completely different dynamics. So Hugh now has bitten the bullet and making one behavioural change, which is planting multi-species swards. He has delivered 5 public good wins. He's improved water quality. He's got better water infiltration. He's got better biodiversity. He's laying more carbon down deeply. He's displaced his nitrous oxide emissions because he's gone cold turkey. He's getting the legumes to do the heavy lifting. He has put no synthetic nitrogen on this field in 3 years. He's done all of that. But the most important thing is he's still producing food and he's making more money, because this is a win-win solution that is delivering for a collection of public goods, whether they're natural capital or not. But this is the kind of thing we need to be doing, rather than necessarily focusing on a silver bullet. like of a methane inhibitor, not mentioning any that you heard before Christmas. On my own farm, we have, I mentioned earlier on, we have these 5 different land uses. And the big public policy debate is about land use change. We're going to hear about land use framework. So one of the questions I have asked of the science community is, can you show me a landscape that actually changed its land use many years ago? And are there consequences, positive and negative, and what are they? And they have really struggled. And ironically, on my own farm, I said, well, why don't I use my own farm? And so we engaged with Wageningen University in Research in the Netherlands, the world's #1 university for agriculture. We've had two master's students helping me on this. And what did we find? Well, the first thing, if you ever go to look at soils on your own, it's really important that you actually understand your soil texture classification. It's variation. So what do I mean by that? Well, your soil is made up of 3 mineral components: clay, silt, and sand. In the case of carbon story, clay will hold more carbon than silt. Silt will hold more carbon than sand. And you can see on the left-hand side the pyramid here, and the dots are the results of my own farm. We have a degree of variation, but the variation actually is minimal. So it meant then when we went and did our soil organic carbon samples to a meter, if we saw differences between the different land uses, it was mainly because of the land use and not because of the soil. And we did. Now, if you look at my results there on the right-hand side, there are 3 that are statistically the same. That is the grassland, the 250-year-old oak woodland, and the 30-year-old oak woodland. And that's astonished me, because I expected my 250-year-old oak woodland to be better than everything. Okay? The willow is slightly different, because the willow started at roughly 120 tonne per hectare. It dropped roughly to about 80 tonne per hectare, because I continuously tillaged for 30 years, all the things that Ian had inherited when he bought the farm here. And then the willows have now brought it up to 135. So the willows have turned it around. But the most impressive one was silver pasture. And why is silver pasture working for here? It is because this diversity of grass roots, legume roots, herb roots, tree roots. I've got plants exuding root exudate the full depth of 1 meter. And because I'm measuring to 1 meter, I'm picking up the total goodness. And so this complex root architecture of where you bring multiple things together, so land sharing, not land sparing, for us certainly, we find that is the one that's worked for us. We've been able to plot then where is our carbon appearing in our soil profiles against the different land uses. And you can see there, the blue and the purple there are the silver pasture and also our willows. And you can see where the extra carbon has been laid down. And in the case of the grass is very high in the top 15 centimetres, but the roots really don't go very far at all. And I mentioned about what we saw with our work from arable, grass to arable, and arable to willow. You can really change with land use what are your carbon stocks. So AHDB were very taken by this work that we've been doing in Northern Ireland, and they asked me to help them. And we launched then 8 months ago a call for expressions of interest, and we were absolutely overwhelmed. We got 510 farmers applied. We could only fund 170, which is really disappointing. And we'd love to fund more. I'd love to have a second phase of this. And we're really going to put this science into action on 170 farms, the length and breadth of the country. And you can see the map there. It's a slightly different map to the Monitor Farm map that was shown earlier on. This is a cross section. It's not just cereals and oilseeds. It's beef, lamb, dairy, and pig, pig as well. This is already rolling out. The LiDAR contract is already issued, and the flying is happening at the moment. Agri-carbon have won the soil carbon, and the calculator tender is now complete, and we're waiting to make an announcement. And this has been funded by levy payers. And it's been funded particularly to get this objectivity in our measurement, so that if we go into natural capital contracts, we know our data. And if we change our behavior and we change our natural capital, whether it be soil carbon, whether it be above ground habitats, whether it be improving water quality, we have an objective handle on that. And we will use this also to influence how government reports in the National Inventory, and therefore how does the Office of Environmental Protection, the Climate Change Committee report in our progress. And my hat's off to both AHDB and QMS for spending levy payers' money in this manner to bring transparency. And really what AHDB is really trying to do is give leadership in this. It's also making sure that levy payers get due recognition for the journey they're on, and they're doing it in a way that is both evidence and data driven as such. I'm just going to finish off to share, you may think I'm absolutely bonkers, but we've actually been able to embed this into Belfast policy in Northern Ireland. So I had the privilege of chairing the writing of the Sustainable Land Management Strategy published in 2016. We then did a pilot, and our pilot proved that if you gave farmers really good information about their own farm, they farmed it better. And lo and behold, you got behavioural change. You didn't talk at them, you talked with them, you mentored them, you supported them. So out of that, we got a £38 million scheme opened in May 2020. The objective was to baseline every field, tree and hedge over 4 years with independent soil sampling and LiDAR surveys done to one standard, so we could compare them. It's a voluntary scheme, it's a carrot and a stick. The carrot is you get the information free of charge and you get training free of charge. The training is mandatory if you go into the voluntary scheme. The stick is when we eventually open our equivalent to ELMS and SFI, you will use your baseline data to evidence your application. And the reason this is important is we're going to repeat this every 5 years. And one of my concerns as a Northern Irish person participating in the English debate, I am really worried, and we've seen it in the recent budget, is if you can't show number 11 Downing Street value for public money, how are you going to win the conversations against schools and hospitals? So for us, certainly, we've taken the decision, we'll do the baseline first, we'll then do the behavioural change, and then we'll do the baseline again. And we'll build up that evidence, so we take an evidence approach to number 11 Downing Street, who actually controls the majority. And that's not putting aside the private sector, but this is about evidencing our journey as such. And what is really interesting is we've got three-quarters of Northern Ireland done, 92% of farm businesses have signed up, which is just outstanding as such. The key thing we've achieved, and it is the same conversation I have now had with the London, Cardiff and Edinburgh governments. The key principle we achieved in Northern Ireland, measuring, reporting and verification with this degree of granularity and integrity is vital, but it's a public good. And that is the bit that government should step in and pay for. And then the private sector bring in their private markets, but don't be the judge and jury. Sorry, we'll have the statutory scheme to do the judge and jury, and we bring this forward. At least then, it goes back to answer my questions. What were my questions? What specifically am I being asked to do, by when, and for how long? Will it distract or interfere with other things my business may deliver now or in the near future? How will I be measured, reported, and verified? Are they subjective or objective? Science and knowledge moves on. How will the contract adjust to this? Where will I get independent expert and legal advice, bearing in mind this is a new market? What provision is there for force majeure? What are the transaction costs? Are they transparent and fair? It starts with knowing your own numbers before committing. We all have to look at the development of natural capital markets in whatever shape, but go in with knowledge. If you go in with knowledge, you'll have a far better conclusion for whatever conversations you have in your own businesses. Thank you very much.